Hello, I'm glad to introduce you this work that Max Friedrich and I did about gamifying face-to-face interviews on latrine use in rural India. In low and middle income countries, face-to-face interviews are common to collect data in social science and health research. Interviews are preferred as they bypass, for instance, sometimes low literacy rates or technological constraints. However, such interviews can be complex, long, and on an easy topic, for instance, when measuring the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal number 6 on the availability and management of water and sanitation for all. Such 45 minutes long interviews were planned in the project promoting latrine use in rural India using the risk, attitude, norms, abilities, and self-regulation, so the RANAS approach to systematic behavior change. There, a trained local data collector asked the questions on latrine use and RANA's approach and entered directly the answers in the database. To improve the respondents' experience during these 45 minutes, we gamified the interview. So the main purpose of the project presented here is really the gamification to improve the experience of the long interviews on an easy topic of latrine use. So importantly in this work, gamification should not interfere with the interview's content about behavior change and latrine use. So the interview main aim remained collecting the relevant data. Practically, the gamification should not relate to the topic of latrine use and should be punctual, so not having long-lasting effects. In addition, it should not increase the interview length, be low cost, be easy to implement for data collector, and also be accessible for all the respondents, so not requiring a minimum literacy level. At the same time, in this study, we aimed to assess systematically the gamification based on the literature. We used the basic psychological needs theory. So it suggests that fulfilling the needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness increases the well-being and performance at tasks. Specifically, our research questions read as follows. First, did participants, respondents experience the interview positively, more positively than when it is not gamified? Was the gamification effect mediated by fulfilling competence and relatedness needs? And was, thirdly, the gamification effect moderated by respondents' ability to complete the puzzle? So given the above-mentioned constraints and following Marshauser methods for gamification, we propose to intertwine the interview to the completion of a puzzle. After each section of the latrine use and RANAS approach questionnaire, the data collectors gave a piece of an image to the respondents, thereby creating a break in the interview and an exchange, so possibly relatedness between the data collector and the respondent. As the interview proceeded through the 20 sections, the image built up little by little, thereby giving a sense of progress and hopefully then the needs for competence is fulfilled. Finally, upon completion, again, the feeling of competence, hopefully, then the image displayed a couple in a greeting thanking pose symbolizing the end of the interview. So after validation of the concept with the Indian partners of the project, the image was color printed on A4 cardboards and cut into 20 regular square pieces of similar size. And during the pre-test, we observed that some respondents faced difficulties completing a puzzle for the first time. So instruction to the data collectors were adapted. They should help the respondent facing difficulties. And also the image was adapted. So we added actually a bird in the corner of the picture. So on the first two pieces of the puzzle to indicate that an image was building up as the respondent received the pieces. The data collectors were also enjoying the little breaks that it created and opportunities for interactions and the sense of progress. And they reported that from their perspective, it was positively perceived. So between March and April 2018, we collected the data. All outcomes for this specific project on the gamification were measured with 5-minute face-to-face interviews administered after the interview on latrine use was completed. The outcomes of these studies were captures on how respondents perceived the experience of the interview. Following items, for instance, were used based on previous studies. How enjoyable was it to answer this interview? And measures for mediators focused, for instance, on competence and relatedness, such as how successful were you to answer the questions in a way that reflects your opinion. All this measured by single items on equidistant 5-point Likert scale. Plus, the data collected answered a few additional questions, such as the puzzle seemed too hard for the respondent, answered either by yes, no, I don't know, or no puzzle in case of the control group. The sample size was determined after the pilot data collection and adapted for a half a scale point difference in the outcome. And in the end, we had, as written here, 2 arms with gamified interview, 1,124 participants, and in the control group, 142. Now moving to the results, very briefly, the main message are the following. Respondents in the gamified interview did not experience a better interview than those in the non-gamified interview. This, on research question 2, the gamification that we proposed did not have much effect on the feelings of competence and cognitiveness or encouragement, which is shown here in the first part of this mediation graph. And that would explain actually why we don't have the expected effect for research question 1. However, the basic psychological need theories constructs explains the mechanism of perceiving the experience of the interview well. So that is supporting further use of basic psychological needs to measure experience. And finally, the effects of the proposed gamification of competence and relatedness depending on the ability of the respondents to complete the puzzles. And in particular, not being able to complete the puzzle had negative effects on the competence and relatedness needs, which in turn had negative effects on the perception of the interview. So of course we were ourselves a bit puzzled here with all these results, but as they came out from very rigorous evaluation and a big sample size, we are confident in our study. And so the proposed gamification of interview was promising, yet should be optional. Its effect depended on the respondent's ability and could backfire. Specifically, if the puzzle's completion challenges a respondent too much, despite the data collector support, the gamification should not be used further. Else, it can be counterproductive, as in our case for 16% of the respondents. Such results were also reported by others. And so easy improvements could also be, for instance, adapting the image or cutting the shapes into irregular shapes. And maybe this could already help people complete the puzzle better. Finally, we would like to highlight the prototype pretesting was extremely useful, and also it is very important to consider culture differences or cultures influences for effective gamification design. Further research, similarly rigorous assessment of gamification with big sample size, um, yeah, it's really needed for further research, we think. Also, for instance, targeting the need of autonomy, which we didn't do in our case, and revising also the questions used for the assessment could be also further venues. Finally, measuring the experience of the data collectors as well and the quality of the collected data and testing the effect of another image could also be interesting perspective. And with this, I'm very happy to answer questions. And yeah, now or later in the roundtable, and also per email later if you see this talk as video recordings. Thank you very much for your attention.